Hello everyone, Brigitta nerfs are now live along with competitive open queue and some SR changes for placements.
After that, we're going to be taking a look at the matches from this past weekend and arguing over which is the better team, Shock or Dragons.
I'm Jav, and this is Avast, and welcome to Contested. Nailed it. Nailed it. Once again, we are live from the Frontier Communication Studio here in Dallas, Texas. I tried to do my best conflicted of when we mix up our names. I think it really should have been closer to like Jav and Avane or something.
That would have worked.
Maybe closer to that. I could have just threw a TH in there.
Jast and Ayaya.
No, I don't like that one as much.
You don't like that one?
I don't like that one as much.
Okay, well, I do need a picture of this conflicted image. And for those of you guys who weren't at the pre-show, which if you're just watching these on the pre-record after it get uploaded to YouTube or on podcast, when we go live, we are doing a pre-show about 10 minutes before we actually press that the real red button, the real record button.
Once we actually hit start.
So, yeah, we had some fan art submitted to us, apparently, of a version of our show, instead of called Contested, called Conflicted, with our facial features swapped and our names mashed up. It's kind of like Joe Rogan.
It's a gene splicing advertisement more so than anything. I said on stream, really it's closer, like we're going to partner with CRISPR. And that's really going to be our...
First, I'm getting immortalized to the 3D printer, and now I'm getting gene spliced.
Welcome to the future. Welcome to the future.
I don't think it's a future I want to be in. But regardless, welcome to another episode of Contested. It's your Tuesday edition. We had a fantastic weekend of games past. And to start things off, let's get right into the Favor 60-second recap. Had some really exciting games this past weekend. One of the most interesting, if not impactful ones, was between the Florida Mayhem and the Houston Outlaws. Great showing with those Genji buffs. We saw basically a showing of Yaki versus Dante, and it was a fantastic show. Yaki really popped off Genji with the new Genji buffs as well, taking them to a 3-2 series. Moving over to the Asian division, the Shanghai Dragons continued their reign of terror. Not only are they going to be taking out the Spark with 3-0, but they also took out one other team, which I can't remember because I'm doing this from memory. Moving on, though. One of their... the Shock...
Was that supposed to tag me in?
No, I was just...
Okay.
Damn, this is close. Okay, the Spark themselves are also starting to struggle. They dropped 2 games this weekend. It was the Spark 3-0'd, or lost 3-0 against the Shanghai Dragons, and then also lost 3-1. So they, despite having the upgrade with Architect, they aren't seeing the same results that we predicted they would. So we're going to have to be talking more about what's going on with the Spark. And final 2 updates, more from the south side of the rankings. Dallas Fuel did manage to pull back from that pretty catastrophic loss against the Vancouver Titans, going 3-0 against the Toronto Defiant. And then the Vancouver Titans themselves continue their win streak, showing that maybe the win against the Dallas Fuel wasn't a fluke, 3-0ing the Boston Uprising, which themselves, the Boston Uprising, were kind of showing to have some improvement with Punk. But now that... we're seeing a little bit of long-term trend. Doesn't look like Boston's going to be moving up nearly as far in the rankings as we thought.
Is that the second? That's the recap?
That's the recap.
Yeah, I thought you turned to me and you're like, and I was like, is he tagging me in? Like, I don't know. Like,
no, I messed that one up. That was... Yeah.
I was because I was like taking the middle of water. I was in the middle of water, and I was like,
it's just.
But overall, from doing it from memory, I thought that was pretty good.
I forgot who the Shanghai Dragons they beat the second game. It was Spark and
I
Seoul Dynasty.
think Seoul.
Right? Yeah.
I think it was 2.
Why can I remember that when I'm not looking at a
or
camera?
something like that.
I don't know what that is.
The pressure's not on.
Yeah, they went 3-1 against the Seoul Dynasty.
Yes.
Which like the Seoul Dynasty. It was kind of weird because you never really know. You always got to flip a coin which Seoul Dynasty is actually going to show up. And it was like a combination of the good Seoul Dynasty showing up, but at the same time, they were just like ulting randomly. It was like that meme with the dude with the oranges.
But I mean, that's Seoul Dynasty. That's a classic.
Yeah, it was
a classic
weird.
From the Seoul Dynasty. Is ulting randomly.
But yeah, and then they just curb stomped the Spark like it wasn't even a fight. So yeah,
it wasn't a good time. But I mean, we could talk about it a little bit later because we are going to talk about the results of this weekend a little bit later down the line. That's 300-second recap.
Man, I got thrown so far off just by messing
recap.
The fact that I couldn't remember the Dynasty.
But we are going to talk about the results a little bit later on down the line today. But we're starting off today with obviously we in the pre-show we said the community tournament, Fran community charity tournament's coming on. But also there's been a buff, or not a buff, but rather a nerfs and some buffs because a new patch has gone live. The retail patch, it started out in the experimental, and they moved it to live pretty quickly,
yes,
I'd say.
Very quickly.
And they've nerfed Brigitta again, I think is the most the biggest is this one of the bigger takeaways. The other two big takeaways of they've competitive open queue has gone live. So there's a separate leaderboard. And on top of that, they have added a new type of placement and how they handle SR for your placement matches at the beginning of the season. Because now the highest you can place is 3,900 SR.
Yeah, that's a little bit of an interesting one because if you do go right into the patch notes, they talk a lot more about what they're doing with it. Is that the maximum that SR, as you said, that you can place is 3,900, but this isn't going to be a change to the MMR. So if you're like a 4,600 player, for example, like this, and you, even if lose 10 placements, win 10 placements, you're going to be placed at 3,900 SR. But your MMR is still going to be that of a player who is at 4,500, and presumably those placements will affect you. So after that, they're saying that they wanted to make it climbing more rewarding because one of the bad parts, of course, was some people were placing at their season's highs, even if they were already in top 500. But,
and they would just camp it because there's no decay anymore.
Yeah, no reason for them to do that at all. However, with this new change, really, even like I'm sure everyone's experienced, or at least I assume people have, when you place low or you're going to do an initial placement and your MMR is way higher, even if you go for a sub 50% win rate, you're still going to be climbing, right? It's like you're going to be getting way more SR for a win than you do for a loss until the system puts you where it thinks you actually belong. So this is all, like, they're trying to make it more rewarding, but also they're making these games basically, there is no impact. It's kind of like regardless of how you play, you're going to start at 3,900, and then regardless of how you play, you're going to climb. So it's kind of like pseudo rewarding, and this is not going to be anywhere close to the MMR reset that people have been asking for.
I will think that I do think. Not that I will think. I will also think in the future, more than likely. But I currently think, but that's debatable, is that starting lower does solve some of the issues that we've had with like a particularly high SR and the end of the match and like towards the upper half of matchmaking.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that overall it's better than not having it, is my view, because you still have to win more games than you lose, especially if you want to climb up into the upper echelons of SR ranges. Now, if you want to hit like that 4,300 plus, 4,400 plus, you sort of have to win a decent amount. And like, sure, your MMR is going to carry you, but like it's a lot harder to climb like a solid 500 SR when you're already like at the Masters level, the high Masters level, than it is to start at like 43 to 4,400 and lose all the way down to like 4K, because that's, I think, where some people have had some issues, is that especially at the super high SR ranges, there is pretty much this reality where you place in and you're sort of just there. It's really tough to leave it, even if you don't really win that many games, unless you're losing like a lot of games.
And there is the other side of this where, they talked about it specifically in the actual patch notes themselves, but this isn't going to be affecting the games or anything like that. These people, they said, like, one of the warnings that they put out is that you are going to see more of these players there's going to be a larger SR difference, but it really is just like the SR on that profile.
Yeah.
So these people who are kind of 3,900, it is, they have to play in order to get back up to those ranks, but they're not competing against 3,900s or 4,000s. They're still going to be competing against the same people they would have competed against, even if they had what originally happened, where they placed at 4,500. So this is
it hasn't fixed MMR in any way.
It doesn't. This is the exact same thing with like World of Warcraft Rested experience, where it's like they've taken what was a negative system and they've tried to turn it into a positive system, where it's like previously it's like decay is bad. It's like now you get to climb, but it's the exact same system. They've just dressed it up a little bit.
I feel like
fancier.
it's a very Blizzard iteration.
It's so Blizzard.
It's an extremely Blizzard iteration where we are on set with a problem and we're gonna dance around the issue for a very long time until maybe we were like, well, you guys just have to deal with the problem. It's a very, very Blizzard way to deal with things. I think it's like technically a step forward, but it's like tiptoeing forward, and like it doesn't solve any of those other greater problems that we have and the underlying problems with those systems. So
I mean, like my question is like the system I really like. And my favorite thing to use to criticize Blizzard is Blizzard's own design decision. So if you look at, for example, Hearthstone, one of the ways that Hearthstone does placements, or at least season to season, is that, this is the other thing. Like, beyond the fact that, especially for anybody above 3,900, this more or less makes placements useless. Let's just accept that. Let's just accept that placements are useless. Like, really, behind the scenes, your MMR is adjusting in every single game. It's just, it shows it to you after 10, so you don't freak out as crazy fluctuations as it's trying to figure out where you are. But like on Hearthstone, you finish the season and it just like drops you down. So if you finished at like rank 16, then you're just like, now you're ranked 17 for something at the start of the season. You have to work yourself back up. But why not, if people are at like 4,500 or something, just kick everybody who is above 4,000 down to 4,000 at the start of the season, like actual MMR at 4,000. Or if you were in the Masters range, put everyone down to 3,500.
It's a great question.
Yeah, like the full MMR reset, where if you put reset absolutely everyone's to the same, where it's like everybody's plat, bronze, you're plat, pro, you're now plat. Like the absolute utter chaos that would make ladder would be, I mean, pretty impressive. But if you could make it kind of like that threshold of 3,999, just drop down.
If everyone just placed at 3,900 MMR as well,
yeah, I mean that would
then
be
essentially you've actually done what you really wanted to do, which is create a starting point. And if you're actually higher ranked, you will work your way up.
And then it's actually a race and a competition to get back up to those high rankings using, the current meta. And especially if we are hopefully at some point, like there is a separate argument to this, like what is the point of having seasons? Really, we're not tying them to...
I mean, doesn't just about every competitive multiplayer game have seasons of some sort, though?
Yeah, but usually they're like they have some sort of identity, or there are changes that actually differentiate between the seasons.
Oh, so you're not a fan of like the 800 different seasons a year?
Yeah, I mean, like the seasons have to have some sort of separate identity to them. The fact that if we're talking about, we back season 3, for example, when season 3 is said, I immediately think about like, okay, the introduction of Ana. This is where we originally started to see things like triple tank and quad tank, and each season, if you do kind of make it a different rule set or a different map pool, that's enough to kind of differentiate them, where people can compete, where the rules are slightly different, the metas are slightly different. But right now, even seasons themselves,
there's no differentiation.
There's no differentiation.
It feels very doomer.
Yeah.
Like I'm just waking up every day and it's the same thing. I got onto the train and I'm just like, just another season happening here. You know, I'm feeling very doomer. Because someone brought up an excellent point, chat. League of Legends in its 10th year.
Yeah,
and it's on its 10th season.
They do a season a year sort of thing. But yeah, it's like, we're like, yay, there's another season. Like, it's just like, what's the point? There's nothing different. Why did you make me do these placements again? Like, seasons are pointless and placements are pointless. So, like,
it's all pointless. Doomer.
Everything's pointless.
Feels doomer, man. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, okay.
And someone asked, but don't pros like consistency in the meta? And I would argue that, what isn't that pretty consistent to have like pretty long seasons where you iterate in between your seasons generally?
Yeah. I mean, pros are not a singular cohesive
and also
group.
That it still ignores the casual community, where even for the casual community, what does these short seasons bring?
Yeah. I mean, like if I stop playing competitive in like rank 7 or season 17 or something, what is about season 18 is going to make me play again?
I mean, we have people that have come back famously. I think we've talked about him on the show before, because you brought up this point, was like a PvP, who is a Junkrat player very famously, and then has moved over mostly towards like Valorant.
Yep. And
comes back and places at essentially the same exact MMR, and is able to get around the same SR after not playing for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And it begs the question of like, why you know, like why are ranked seasons, like why does it feel like I'm going to a museum and Blizzard is the docent walking me around? It's like, here is your MMR from 800 years ago, sir. Like, and I'm like, this doesn't have an accurate reflection.
If you, especially, unranked to GM or challenges are really popular and all that. But if I'm coming back to a game, for example, I'm obviously not going to be able to compete at the GM level or the top 500 level. But, if a person is coming back to get back into the swing of things, a top 500 player or something, like a couple games in Diamond, a couple games in Master, as they're relearning how things have changed, it's not a bad thing. They're definitely not as educated in the meta, they're not as updated, and as they climb, they'll learn the things where they can actually very gracefully re-enter the competitive ecosystem without that kind of anxiety of being a dead weight to their teammates. I know that, like... I don't want to move into like human psychology or thing, but that is something that prevents a lot of people.
But I do want to get very Freudian.
Yes, I'll go with Adler. You take the Freudian approach, and Mike can take the Young approach.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't honestly. I don't know much about psychology. I can drop a Freud, but like psychology. There we go. I'm not. It's not my field. Oh, see, our producer Mike has a bachelor's in psych, so we do have some psychology in the house.
Okay.
But the purpose, overall, if we could summarize how we feel about this, it don't make no sense.
I mean, my opinion is embracing the Doomer identity. Nothing matters.
So your opinion is more we should go for we should just have one season forever, and it all blends into one thing. It's
just like, continue the rat race.
They're releasing Blizzard releases the new seasonal concept, and it's just time is a linear concept.
Yeah.
And it only marches forward, never ending entropy. But I don't think that's going to be the solution.
We're entering like war games territory where the only winning move is not to play. Yeah.
It could be.
I mean, the game I played before Overwatch Eveline, it was always joked that winning the game was finally mustering up the courage to quit.
But overall, I would like to see some more substantial changes, specifically around MMR. I could take or leave the seasonal aspects, like whatever. If they want to have these mini seasons, like sure. But I would like to definitely tackle the MMR specifically, rather, because if you just adjust the ranks without the MMR, then like you've said earlier, it will change it a bit, but it probably won't still have the exact intended result or desired result that everyone really wants without tackling the issue exactly.
Absolutely. It is kind of, 50 flavors of gray right now. I'd like a little bit spice or identity, things that
Well, you have competitive open queue now.
Yes.
Which, I mean,
definitely spice.
It exists.
Yeah. I am very, very interested to see how this is actually going to play out. Because not only how it's going to play out just in general with the player base, but how it's going to play out compared to the Korean server. Because I have this suspicion that the Korean server is going to treat the separation between the competitive and the open rank or open queue quite differently. And I think that I
tend to agree.
Yeah. Go.
Well, I mean, I just tend to agree that in everything, our rank, like just because of the culture of games in our various regions, and and it obviously transcends into the culture of esports too. There's a reason NA's bad. There is a reason NA gamers are bad, and there's a reason we lag behind in just about every structure.
And
it's
those
just just culturally how we approach games, I think, holistically, and it starts at our ranked ladder. And while for the Korean ladder, for the Korean and for those Korean players, it's just a very, very different. Like, I'm going in to play ranked. Sure, you're gonna have your trolls. There's a lot of hacking problems, but overall, it's supposed to be a collaborative, competitive experience. Well, in NA, it's like, I'm picking Torbjorn and I'm running down mid. Good luck, everybody. And so I think that overall, it'll probably treat it differently, but it's still at its base, it's always going to be very differently because of those cultural reasons.
And this is also going to come down to a little bit of an elitist thing as well. I definitely think that there is going to be this sentiment where open queue isn't the real ranked. It's the competitive ranked queue is the original one. It's the one that most closely matches the rule set of the Overwatch League. That if you're top 500 in open queue, people are going to be like, oh, it's open queue. That's easy. Anybody could accomplish.
Well, I mean, top 500 in those other arcade modes was 3,700 at times.
Yeah,
so.
And there was a lot of people who were gold or silver or something, getting top 500 in some of the arcade modes. It's definitely, it's a different purpose. I would be interested to see if somebody is consistently rank 1 on the open queue ladder, for example, would they get any tryouts to tier 2 teams, let alone Overwatch teams?
No.
Yeah.
Unless the entirety of the culture shifted to that ladder, right? Yeah, because otherwise.
But right now, people are going to be discounted, where somebody can get their shiny things, or they can play in kind of a ranked light mode. But in terms of the hardcores of the old boys club, it's going to be, I assume that at least from my understanding of the North American culture, it's going to be looked down upon quite a bit. So.
And then same goes, because unless your entire player base shifts to that queue and treats it as the new queue, there's just no one's going to take it seriously. It's more of an and Jeff Kaplan, I think himself, has said because of the reason they wanted to try it was because of the success it had in Korea, but once again, it's still just even in Korea, where it had a lot of success, it still didn't mean it was the standard for competition, right? It just was more successful because it just fit better.
Yeah, and it's a competitive rule set with a ranking system, but there's also the side of things where when I play competitive, I am at least going with the attention that I want to win, I want to climb, sort of thing. But when I'm looking about what reasons would inspire me personally to play the open queue system, and that's more I want to play more like quick play, but quick play. Long queue times, you only get half the map, sort of thing. You don't get an attack and a defense, so you don't get that sort of thing. If you get full held, can't try and go for a better full held. The map's just over. So looking for longer games with a more competitive rule set, but not completely try hard, so I can do a little bit of improvement without really trying to care too much. And that's kind of where I'd be doing. So even myself personally, I would struggle to take open queue as seriously as I would ranked, and I think that's probably going to become
an issue, I think.
Yes. Hopefully the people who are, and I don't think it's going to happen, but hopefully the people who just want a one-trick hero or something like that, hopefully the people who care about that stuff do migrate more towards the open queue. I don't know if they will.
See, but then also because we have a secondary problem, right? Because not only do we have the cultural problem of people won't take it as seriously as a regular ranked ladder, then it just turns into low prio. Yes. Then open queue just becomes low prio, where everyone's hanging out is these were the one tricks congregate. Welcome. It's very swiftly everyone's like,
I'm good, thanks.
why would I be here? Like, it's essentially just optional low prio, which, I mean, to be fair, like, if that was Blizzard's in design, was sort of like, what if we make something like it's like building a separate area that appeals to the one tricks, and they all go there.
Yeah.
And then what if they self quarantine essentially, and everyone, and like if that is the big brain moves, then well done, Jeff.
Massive thinkers. They've
Well done.
outthought all of us.
But I don't quite think that is the intended goal. I don't think that's the intended goal of OpenQ at all. So it's really gonna have to see, like, really just gonna have to watch like how it develops and how popular it really is. But I think our initial assessments are likely what will happen with OpenQ.
And it could be a self-fulfilling prophecy too. You know, where if everyone thinks that's going to be what happens, then it's going to happen. Where maybe all of us need to believe in a better future.
Yeah, but once again, like you can't like, I mean, we remember with the tone so far of the show, especially in relation to ranked, is very doomer so far. So, and for things to change, we must have strong leadership from the top, from Blizzard really restructuring. Like, you can't rely on you know, Nutmaster 69 to be your change you see in ranked. You can't rely on that. That just wouldn't make any sense, you know? Like, I can't, it's no different than any other like community where you can't expect the average person realistically at this point to be the change you want to see. It sounds great, sounds utopian, but it's not how it works. Like, realistically, it's not how it works.
So going back to the Brigitta changes, or the patch notes in general, the one that went live as well was the Brigitta changes. So they did go through with making sure that armor packs don't provide any armor healing. And at least for myself, when I'm looking at this, with how intricate Brig's relationship is to the meta right now, you know, the ability to over armor flankers, other supports, things like that, being able to actually change breakpoints, for example. You know, if you're having, I was watching the San Francisco Shock versus the Philadelphia Fusion match, and you had Carpe fighting against a Ashe and a Mei. So Ashe and Mei are both characters that can one-shot Tracer, but they got around that just by giving, you know, the Tracer the armor pack so that she moves above that kind of damage breakpoint, and she is survivable even with a direct headshot from either of those characters. So with that, what I'm trying to kind of illustrate here is how much of a wide sweeping impact this change is going to have for Brigitta, because not only is it changing Brigitta as a character herself, but she's changing the matchups and the breakpoints for matchups between characters that are not herself. So when I was looking at this, I think that I'm just going to take the cop-out approach and say that I think it's pretty much impossible here to predict what's going to be the result of this change. I definitely think that it's going to hurt dive and make flankers less effective, but beyond shaping the overall picture of how Overwatch plays, I find it really hard to predict what the end result of this is going to be. What do you think?
I mean, it's always, first of all, I want to, Jayne, someone says Jayne breakpoints con. It's a staple of the Jayne Overwatch vocabulary.
They're important, okay?
I mean, you know, it is important. It's just funny because it's a very, like, most people don't think of the game, because they think of the game that way, but they never, like, codify it in that manner, which is like, but that's besides the point. The point here about your vocabulary. But also, by the way, chat, we have a bell waiting next to us.
Oh, you spoiled it.
We spoiled it, but this is more of a, now I'm adding suspense.
Okay.
Where
this is
at
like
some point,
who's the director? Hitchcock, who puts the bomb under the table to make a scene more exciting? See? You don't know anything about
I don't know.
You know about Sandlot and Boyhood, but you don't know about Alfred Hitchcock.
I don't know. I mean, I think I've heard the name, but the thing is,
you've heard the name Hitchcock.
Yes,
I'm glad we've set the bar so low.
But the point is, I'm adding the suspense, chat. When we hit a vocab word of the day, the bell's going to be rung. All right? So just be prepared, or don't be prepared. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Now, let me get back to my.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember what my point was.
Did you derail yourself again?
Now we're back to where I was at. So,
hey.
So we were talking about how we feel like the Brig nerfs, and you felt it was pretty unpredictable.
Yes.
And how it's going to change. See everyone dropping OAs. We felt like it was going to be changed, and I do think that for me, on the base level, it comes down a lot to what, for teams, there's sort of a meta inertia a lot of the time.
Meta inertia?
A meta inertia. And there's the bell.
Word of the day alert!
Got the bell.
Word of the day alert! Today's
there
word of the
it
day is inertia.
Inertia. I feel like we also had bigger words than inertia before. I had like entropy, But I guess we've just decided inertia is to be the one. I feel like inertia was to be the one, but I'll take it. I'll take it. That overall, I'm gonna give it a solid. It's a good start. It's a good start to the bell. But there is a meta inertia, right?
Yep.
And that squads will and teams will sort of like it's like I've had this ongoing argument about Ashe.
Okay.
Because a lot of people are like, well, actually, people didn't start running Ashe until after buffs, which is true.
It is true.
But the things that teams were trying to experiment with her before that, but everyone generally agreed she was bad. And then what really sort of forced it over the edge was the fact that when hero pools and they banned all the hit scan, everyone was like, now we can play Ashe.
Preach, Avast.
And that's how I feel about Brigitta in a lot of the ways where, like, even if Brigitta potentially ends up being a lot worse, will teams want to change off of that?
Yes, because they've put so much effort into learning her playstyle. And this is the same argument that I'm going to be using in our next section, which is about Genji. Very similar in that they have put so much playtime and scrim time into working with a Brigitta. There is, intellectual clarity what you meant by meta inertia. At first I was like, Avast, you're just using big words for the point of that it makes perfect sense. I'm gonna yoink that. I'm gonna become Jayne.
Meta inertia Conroy.
That's a new one. That's going in the vocab. That's going in the Jayne's little book of vocab words.
Excellent. I'm always glad to make stuff.
It perfectly describes what is happening is that there is, I think the word that I would have used previously would have been like institutional knowledge, where like teams have knowledge, players have practice, muscle memory, things where they know how these heroes work, how they function, how they work in comps, how they work against comps, all these things. And that knowledge it's going to favor continuing that playstyle, even if it drops below the theoretically most optimal. So that's a great point.
And I do think I also think that though hero pools have adjusted that, have moved it a bit,
Yeah.
They've applied some grease to the squeaky wheels of like how we change comps and how we adapt. So it's very possible it could change it a lot because on paper it should. I don't think it changes your backline interaction at all. She's still going to be great at pocketing backlines, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But because you need the burst healing, you need like the peel and the inspire and everything that Brigitta provides. But the biggest thing she loses is that you don't have armor for your flankers.
Yes.
And changing those breakpoints. But considering that you can still easily pocket it though, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, a really reoccurring fact too that people have asked a lot about the meta, especially now that we've seen a lot more Genji.
Yes.
Is why aren't we seeing more Ana? Why are we not playing a lot more Ana with Genji? Because there is Ana, a decent amount of Ana played, but a lot of teams still opted to play like a Brig Bap.
Yes.
And so, or even like a Brig Zen sometimes, but like it still offers the ability, even without the armor, to much more easily and consistently heal your flankers than an Ana could. Because an Ana, you still have to deal with shields, you still have to deal with diving.
And the Ana herself is much more vulnerable.
Yes.
So if you're playing an Ana and the opponent has flanker plus Brig,
and also like Rally and her general rest of her kit is still very
absolutely.
strong, right? So I think at this point it's fair to say we don't really know which way it should move. On paper, it might, because not having armor changes a lot of the matchup significantly, and not being able to armor pack like stuff like Genji or Tracer beforehand, or even Echo. But considering that the utility you still receive and the fact that teams have practiced with her so much, I really don't know if it actually changes the matchups drastically. It's more of what do teams think? How do the best players really react around those changes? Because if you can still get max value from instantaneous healing, then I mean the goal is about the same still. It's pretty much the same exact result. And it does lead into like they've made Diva Changes, pretty significant Diva Changes, which pretty much once again everyone argues over the terminology. It's like Fat Tracer, Fat Genji,
Fat Flanker.
Fat Flanker. She gets a lot more lethal, I think, and she gets a lot more utility as well.
And
with the
she
cooldown changes.
the tempo of her play, I think, increases quite a bit. She can move faster while firing, so things can pull range on her like less effectively. Her defense matrix changes as well. She can flash it on and off, so be a lot more reactive to cooldowns, which is not only going to be eating ultimates, but also eating things like sleep darts, anti-nades, things that make Ana effective. That sort of
that also hurts it.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Diva is definitely getting buffs. I'm not sure if it's going to be enough to.
We've seen some Diva play a bit, but it still seems mostly revolved around Sigma,
Yes.
and a large portion still is that Sigma just continually offers better utility to survive the damage.
Right now we do have the situation where I think, and I've been looking at the games this past weekend. I watched a lot of them live, and some of them I reviewed on top of that. And one of the big things is that I've talked about Sigma not being a complete replacement to Diva before. But in this case, because there's not much emphasis on the high ground, that's kind of like the one big difference between Sigma and Diva is that Diva can very rapidly go to a high ground and shift between high grounds. Now, Sigma has some high ground contest. He can exit on high grounds using his ultimate. He can use his little orb things to jump into windows because he gets those.
There was a lot of controversy of like who was teaching who those tricks, by the way. Like Contenders players like Icy were like, I taught Choi how to jump the high ground. Everyone was like, oh, wow. And like Albert was like, actually, everyone's been doing this for weeks. And all the chats like, whoa, he's jumping his Sigma.
Like, I mean, it's knockback from an AoE explosion.
It's okay.
You really require a tier 2 player to.
It's okay. Sometimes you're just tech deck Sigma. But yeah, go on.
My point being that like there is. Sigma has some ability to contest high ground, but not nearly as much as Diva. But the important part is going to be the defense matrix and the black hole comparison. And with Dynamite and the pull being so effective right now, both of those are being utilized in ways that Sigma actually is able to counter using that black hole. You don't need the combination of high ground plus defense matrix. All of the abilities are using very central around where Sigmas are playing. So he's kind of good enough to replace Diva.
I really think Halt is like the key.
It is.
I think Halt, and I've definitely like I've sort of defined myself as all the best teams are the teams that are best at using Halt.
That was my takeaway from this weekend. Thank you for spoiling it. But
yep.
Yeah,
get owned. Get owned. There it is.
What is with you and just Galaxy? Just actually so smart today. You're on fire.
It's simply it's because chat. I see someone's chat says I'm too dumb to understand vertical movement, but don't worry.
See,
we're here to figure out the third dimension
movement,
for you.
Vertical movement.
We're here to figure it out. Technically, it's more of like a Z, I guess, in this factor than a Y at points, but like still, Halt is the most important cooldown in this entire in everything right now. And that's why Diva's not strong.
And yes, so this is why I say that normally Diva would be a counter to Orisa, but because Halt's used in a way that allows you to use Sigma instead of Diva to counter it, these buffs aren't going to bring Diva back into the meta.
Mm-hmm. And also, a Sigma, part of the reasons why that Sigma also, on top of the extra utility that Sigma provides that Diva doesn't because of the shields, Sigma also just combos way better with Halt than Diva.
Yeah.
Like, what is your play for Diva here? So you're going to Halt and then hopefully run your Diva into the backline to run someone over and then get out, which is technically possible because they have up their burst damage, you know? But when you're playing against a backline of likely a BAP and a Brigitta, it's extremely unlikely you're going to be able to burst down any of those players really quickly with a Diva, as opposed to just hitting them with a big rock and stunning them and then taking down some more damage, because Sigma also still does this.
And not only do rocks work against tanks, but they also work really good against flankers.
Yes.
So you don't need that Diva protection for the flankers either. So there's this like one niche that Diva is really good at, and these buffs have made her even better at, but that niche right now is irrelevant.
But who knows? Because maybe with the evolution of Halt and these buffs to Diva, you could theoretically have some combos there if teams want to play it that way.
And I think that in order for us to get to that, we're probably going to get to require a hero pool to ban Sigma.
Yes.
Which
obviously won't be banning for this upcoming weekend. Because
no, not for this weekend, because this is going to be no hero pools. But, the next, once we get back into it, if the hero pool contains Sigma,
it would be interesting to see what happens with there, because then teams are obviously forced to play Diva, and then we see, like, do they find
with the Brigitta nerfs already, not only are you having the flankers destroyed, but again, you can maybe go back to a little bit more to dive. It's going to open up dive. So if we get the combination of Brigitta, no, you don't even need Brigitta ban because she's nerfed. Like,
you don't have armor pack anymore, at least, but you can still instant heal, right? Is the question.
So, I mean, if Brig and Sigma get banned, oh boy, is it going to be wild.
And also, the other, yet another thing that Brigitta still adds there is, like, if you have a really good Brig player and your Diva zooms to the backline to try to run over them, she can just bash.
Yep.
So, which you can't bash a rock.
No.
So I do think that there is like another significant like thing there with that, a synergy with Sigma and Orisa that Diva doesn't necessarily just have, which is a really important thing I think in general to look about. Isn't that a problem to that high stake matches are all just double shield? I mean, it's a problem.
I mean, high stake matches used to all be goats.
Yeah, but we had a year of all goats. Before that, we had a year of all dive centric metas with Winston and Diva.
I mean, breaking news: best composition used by best teams.
Yes, and also, I mean, we still just have a limited number of options of how we move forward, right? There isn't a huge variety of tanks, and so we're always going to be, for the most part, stuck on a pretty static tank meta.
Yes, we're seeing quite a lot of variation in DPS. We even saw some. Echo Sombra stuff. We actually saw Mirror Echo Sombra a couple times. It wasn't the most effective thing in the world, but we saw it. It was a thing that occurred. But
I guess it's more of a problem if you consider, like, most people can only consider Orisa the most engaging hero, which I agree with.
Yes.
And also, you want to be able to have multiple viable compositions. And yes, by the way, you can bash the rock, but my point being was not, yes, you can bash the rock. The point around that analogy was rather, Brigitta must then bash a ability versus a player and stun.
The point is, like, even if you bash the rock, it's not like
now you don't have
Sigma
bash
vulnerable
for
right?
like the next opposing fight, right?
Yes,
So you haven't locked anyone into your backline to like punish. So it's like a very different interaction. Still,
very,
even
very
if
different.
Yes, you can bash rock.
So other than Brigitta, and this was in this most recent patch note, but the last patch note, and it just went live in Overwatch League, was the Genji changes. And due to that, we saw a crazy amount of fantastic Genji play pretty much all weekend. The ones that stuck out in my mind, I'm sure you'll have a few: Tuba, Sparkle, Doha, Yaki.
No, go on. I'm just thinking.
I mean, those are the
you
four.
want me to add? Oh, there's your 4?
Yeah, those are the 4 that I looked at the most, and like it's crazy. Especially people have been talking about the Shuriken changes. So of course we went from 28 damage to 30 damage, which changed his break points.
There it is.
But additionally to that, he also had a few other changes with his reflect being canceled. And the question really was this going to be changing Genji's playstyle? Is he could just become even more of a blade bot? Now, taking into consideration the meta inertia, I don't think we've seen nearly as much changes as theoretically as possible. From looking at all of the Genji play that I did from this past weekend, I think that we are very, very similar to how Genji used to be played. His blade is building at a much faster rate, more significant rate. Even though we're not using the nano boost nearly as much to keep him alive, he is still getting value in quite a few situations. And he is primarily be using to farm blade. And his like the fact that he is an ult bot just got better because he is charging things significantly faster just with that extra 2 damage per shuriken sort of thing. For example, like Sparkle during the entire match against, who did they play? The Valiant?
They played Valiant.
Valiant? Yeah. There was only about, from what I saw, about like 2 engagements or something where he went in on somebody that he probably wouldn't have otherwise gone, just because he used the new tech, the higher damage, to actually secure kills that he wouldn't have otherwise. But really, other than that, the playstyle around Genji that we've seen from this past weekend was very much around building ult charge, playing safe, and then winning fights with Blade. And it's actually incredible how much faster his Blade is charging. For example, Sparkle on defense, Hanamura against the Valiant, of the 5 fights that they had on defense, he had Blade for 4 of them.
To be fair, Sparkle is a huge outlier on just Genji performance.
Yeah.
Of how good Sparkle
He's
really
actually
performed.
just insane to watch. He does something every single fight that I'm just like, holy smokes.
I will say that overall, I'm excited to see Genji back in the meta. I'm really excited, in fact, because everyone loves watching Genji be played, and it's really interesting to see now that Genji has so much strength on top of the Brigitta utility, on top of halts, because we had people utilizing halts for Genji all the time.
Yeah.
Like, which also just speaks more to the power of halt, where because you can use it for everything. Like if you were to, like if you can literally use halt for almost any combo you can think of. That's how strong, because it's just a mini grab on cooldown. Now they said they increased the sound of it though, so that's cool. But not quite that loud. Maybe if it screamed at you, you would know that you could. If it barreled towards you screaming. But I do think that Genji being in the meta again is extremely interesting, and it's really fun to see. I still hold my reservations because I wonder how it affects the game later on down the line. Because if Genji really is as powerful, we've just ended back into the Blizzard trap of we buffed a character to make him strong again. And when eventually our wheel of balance hits, like
the wheel of balance
hits the thing that sort of made him non-viable to begin with, then Genji now becomes just an immortal legend of DPS if you have it in the right hands, you know?
Yeah.
Which I do think is a problem at points. But, you know, such is life. Still excited to see Genji. I think it's really interesting to see, because I wasn't expecting to be Genji get so much value. But looking at how fast those blades were charging and the value you can get from halts, and when you put it in the hands of really good Genji players, because the damage means you can actually... We saw Genji just straight up like assassinate DPS characters.
Oh, yeah.
Multiple times. And backline members when they were able to find
Especially
them.
like the Ashe, the Hanzo, the Widowmaker, these targets are also become a lot more vulnerable because of the reflect changes. You know, even if you shoot into the reflect, he can now cancel it and fire shurikens into you before you can even take your next shot. So, like, shooting is just so much more punishing because you can be like, okay, now I'm safe. Just stop, and you're dead.
But I think also we've indirectly as well with these Genji buffs led us once again into a world where BAP becomes even more necessary because of the fact that strong teams are just farming Blade really quickly, and then you have a Blade, right? And you're almost never for the most part, you're almost never going to be getting support ults as fast as you need to counter a Blade. So you know what's a relatively required backline is a bat.
We've seen Immortality Fields countering Blade successfully.
It's the combination with the Immortality Field and your other cooldowns in the Brigitta. I think the thing is that it's not countering successfully, but it's because of how strong Genji is. You must have it, or else you're always dying.
Oh,
to
yes, you're always dying.
Yeah.
That is true. Yes.
That's. I feel like we've pushed ourselves in a direction where we must have BAP even more, which is once again, I mean, and then if our solution becomes we nerf BAP, then we're in a situation where Genji's is so strong. So I do think that that's these chain of events that we can end up going towards, which is kind of scary, I think, for balance. But Genji's good. We saw Genji's just winning duels versus tracers now all the time, which used to be a mismatch, a pretty big mismatch. But now that you can cancel deflect and do more damage to a low HP target while getting packed, oh my goodness, Genji is just so good versus flankers too.
There's one comment in chat I want to just respond to before we move on from this Genji topic, and he was saying, "You think Sparkle's Genji was good, but Hoxel beat him by damage in 20%." So Sparkle's playstyle, and I watched this like less than 2 hours ago. Sparkle's playstyle is very right now based around Blade, where he will farm up to his Blade, and then he would just not even poke, just like sit and wait. So they're like Sparkle's Genji playstyle has a lot of downtime where he doesn't really, if there's not something that is directly going to win a fight, he's not putting himself at really any risk of getting shot or just something unlucky occurring. So Sparkle's playstyle does have a lot of downtime. It doesn't surprise me at all that his damage is lower, even though he is such a stellar Genji. It comes down to his playstyle, not just Hoxel being way better than Sparkle. So wanted to respond to that one. But now we were talking about Halt being effective, and this is a little bit of a loop back, but
we do love loop backs.
We love loop backs.
We love
I mean, there's so many branching things that we could go talk about, but Ansan Sniper, he had an absolutely incredible performance on Ilios. And what was his statistics? Like 50 or
56% crit accuracy.
Yeah, so 56% crit accuracy, which previously we've talked about like 42% was Decay.
Was it 42 or 40?
Decay hit 42%.
It was pretty high.
Yeah, so and before that, like, previously, like last year, we'd been freaking out about like Saya player hitting mid-30s before, so we have now jumped from a territory which we thought was inhuman was mid-30s, and then Decay has become even more inhuman at 42%, and now we're seeing Ansan
We have
Sniper
ascended to a next level.
Yeah, so I was like, people were like, Ansan Sniper had a transcendent performance on Ilios, and I watched it, and he had, I think, the most impressive thing. He didn't hit any crazy shots. There weren't any nutty mechanical stuff. We're not talking about like Bunny versus Tymo in like Apex where he does the hook flip.
Oh, the hook shot.
Yeah,
yes.
like there are some pretty famous highlight-worthy clips that have come out of Widowmakers. None of those occurred on Ilios. None of them.
I think there were some impressive shots, but they weren't inhuman. They
were impressive, but not inhuman. I think, and the important part. Two reasons why his crit accuracy was so high. And I know this is going to rain on Shock fans, or Shock fans are going to be like, yeah, Ansan Sniper, the best guy in the world. Like, he's still great. And first of all, before we get into the Shock versus Dragons match, I do think that Shock are a better team for the Dragons. I know you think the opposite. We'll talk about that in a bit. But first off, Carpe was the one assigned to try and assassinate Ansan Sniper. And on the very first shot, Ansan Sniper took out Carpe twice in a row. So he only used one shot. It was a crit shot. Carpe was done, and then after that, because Carpe had been eliminated, pretty much the entire rest of the map, Shock just focused on halts, and Ansan Sniper shot into the halt pretty much every single time. So that halt is being used not just combos with Sigmas, not just combos with Tracer Pulse Bombs or Flux, with everything.
It's everything. It's all spice. It's all spice. You can put it on everything.
It was, that attribute that he won the duel with Carpe, and Carpe was like he peeked to blink over to start the fight, right? And Ansan Sniper just like knew where he was, probably through proper scouting, good communication with his team. Like Carpe didn't even have a chance to even take the cool.
Right now, who currently is your biggest fan is Surefor. Lane Roberts right now, he made the same point, and he is very happy that you were making these same points. Because Lane Roberts came on, and he's like, oh, well, they're doing a lot of halts, and like he had a lot of pressure and everything. And this is when Twitch chat generally goes around like, okay, Lane Roberts. Okay, Surefor. Like, yeah, classic Surefor. Like, make it. But it's a very valid point,
I didn't even hear like he made.
He did. Yeah, he made an entirely separate but equal, entirely good argument.
Yeah.
A very good argument.
So, I think Ans is good, but he is not 58% crit accuracy good. He had zero pressure. He was in the exact same place the entire fight. Perfect direct line of sight onto where Philadelphia Fusion was. The Shock did a great job corralling them into that location, and then over and over and over again, they were halted directly into Ansan Sniper's line of sight, and they were killed.
Yes.
And a lot of times as well, like supercharger shots, headshots onto Orissa's. Like, a lot of these shots, like, I think the absolute most impressive thing about Onset Sniper's performance wasn't necessarily the aim, but like his awareness of where these flankers were, where his threats were, and like I want to say his positioning, but that's more on the team level. But his awareness of flankers.
But it still doesn't detract from his performance.
No, it doesn't. It just moves it from like what it was. It was not mechanical, like with the stuff that we talked about, like Saya players.
I still think the consistency of it alone, though, was insanely impressive.
I mean, yes, halting and knowing where a halted target.
But this is more. But this is just the fact that I think 100% other snipers would be missing those shots.
Really?
Not all of them, but like top snipers would still hit them, right? But it still differentiates Onsen, I think, from the consistency that he continually hit them.
Yeah.
I still think it differentiates him a bit. Obviously.
I think Ons is like way more mechanically skilled than these shots required him to be. He has, like, in terms of how skillful he is, he could hit way more difficult shots. He just put himself in a position, and the San Francisco Shock, more importantly, put him in a position where he didn't have to hit those shots. So all of these were like warm-up.
And that's still also another very important skill is that being in the right position and always being set up for the combo is an equally important skill.
And I think that's at a team-based level, and it's a credit to the Shock themselves, not solely to be bestowed upon Ans, which is one of the reasons why I do think that in the matchup between the San Francisco Shock and the Dragons, the Shock are the better team. I think that the Shock and the Dragons are both pretty equally skilled in terms of the macro, the actual setup, but at the end of the day, I do think the deciding factor, I mean, like, we can talk about the supports as well, because the Shock supports, especially with the upgrade in Twilight, that's incredible. But like, I don't see the same sort of superstar pop-off, or where it does actually become a situation where macro is no longer the deciding factor, and we do have to rely on to individually pop-ups, or pop-offs rather. I think that Shock does have the edge in that matchup, and you've made a great point before that the Asian region just in general is a higher level of competition, and I'd agree with you. I'd probably rank Philly Fusion middle upper in the Asian region, but I still think that despite them probably being the second best team in NA right now, I think that Shock is a step above, not just everyone in the North American region, but I do think they're above everyone in the Asian region as well.
I think for myself, it's predicated. That's the big thing, is that like, and my position has wavered a bit now, is that I still believe Dragons are a stronger team, but it's just hard. We don't have any interregional play, right? We have no basis, and so it's all eye test. And you have to look at all the external factors, right? Like Shock crushes really good teams in NA, but they're still NA-based teams, right? And you look at the parity of the squads in the Asia region, even the bad ones, like Chengdu sometimes just randomly does Chengdu things and will just win a game, like even a crush a game. But like, and so it's really hard for us to make like super direct comparisons because there are no direct comparisons.
Like, you can't prove me wrong.
I can't prove you wrong, like, and you can't prove me wrong. Like, there's no answer, right? Like, and so I think we're sort of just taking a stand, right?
Yeah.
And also, it's not unreasonable to say that Shock is the best team in the world right now. It's not unreasonable. Like, no one should be frothing at the mouth. Like, if any Dragons fans are like just going, blah, 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 like, I can't believe you'd say that Shock are better than Dragons. Like, no. Like, now granted, I guess there's Wolf. I guess Wolf still, he made that copy pasta on Twitter of like, oh, Dragons are the undisputed best in the world, then you can at me later if it gets disproven. It's like, yeah, I think that's a little silly. But that's a very Wolf moment.
That's very Wolf.
That is an extremely Wolf Schroeder moment. So I don't think that it's like, though, unreasonable to say that Shock is the best team in the world. I'm just basing it entirely off of like, this squad is in the hardest region and they're consistently number one. And they have close matches, and even sometimes they've lost a couple matches.
Only to Chengdu.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Only to Chengdu. So, that's true. They've only lost to Chengdu, but they have a lot of close matches for other teams. But a lot of these teams are still really, really good. And in my opinion, like, also, Charge is the third best team in the league right now.
Yes, 100% agree.
So when you have
your
close
takes
matches,
are getting better and better today.
when we approach parity, when we approach complete agreement on everything, that's how we know we've truly mind melded here and conflicted. And so I do think that it's still crazy to think that like, oh, Shock are just so much better than Dragons, but it's like, they're just playing way harder teams. Like, I don't think it's at all fair to compare like any of the teams in A realistically other than Shock to any of the teams in APAC. Like, it's just, other than like maybe when teams have really, really good showings, like when Mayhem or even Valiant can show up, or Fusion if they can harness the power of like the raw talent they have if they ever could, but it's just not the equivalent. I think the regions right now, it's just really not equivalent. Like, especially when I watch like, oh gosh, you know, Tuba was one of your players to watch.
Oh,
and then we had to watch the Boston Justice match, and I'm like, what happened? Like, what happened here? What, like, I was very strictly like, man, Boston's really bad. Like, Boston's real bad. And then they're like, okay, they play kind of well. And then I see these matches with Boston this week, and I'm like, what's happened? And also, this should force them into metas that are more desirable for them too, because Jerry can play more things. ColorX can play like more of his comfort pick heroes. It just doesn't. I mean, it's just brutal to see where their performance has fallen. But the real takeaway from this is that Gladiators are not good.
No, they're not.
That's really it. That's really. That's like I think that's it. Gladiators are just. I'm sorry, Glads fans. I have no confidence in this team when I've seen their performances recently, and then now compare them to the teams that they like lost to or played close to, and where they're at now. Which just. What's going on?
And now this is interesting. I really liked your tweet about the Gladiators after they played. You said that they were like in a quantum super.
They are the dark matter. They are there. We know they're there, but I don't know where. I don't know how to explain it. I can't explain that. Tide comes in. Tide comes out.
Can't explain that.
I can't explain it.
Yeah, and you know we talked about this when we first saw that Gladiators might be in trouble. I don't even know how many weeks ago that was. What
we saw the portents.
Yeah, but what happened that caused it was the. Do you remember what it was? What match happened that caused us to go like, there could be a problem here for Gladiators? What was that match? Was it the one where it was like disrespectful and they lost to the Valiant?
It might have been Valiant. It could have been Boston too.
Chat, does anyone remember where we first started saying that Gladiators could be in trouble?
I mean, it could have been the match where they lost to Boston, or it could have been the Valiant match as well.
Yeah.
It could have been either of the ones. But the Valiant match, I think our narrative a lot more there was more like they boom pretty easily.
Yes, that's what it was. We were talking about like a lot of their problems were if they are going to be coming or getting into trouble, it's going to become because of their mental, because of their culture. And you do have those players who are really, really quite confident, you know, Space and OG, but people who I wouldn't say are as mentally resilient as, say, you know, to use an easy example, the San Francisco Shock.
They beat the Valiant, though. Yes, it was a 3-2, and it was also when they were extremely favored.
They were still, like, they beat the 3-2, and they still boomed.
And that's when people also considered the Valiant comp to be a troll comp, too.
Yes.
Like, it wasn't quite as... people didn't feel like there was such a strong comp.
Yeah, so they lost to the Valiant on April 16th, and then they beat the Valiant on April 16th, and then they lost to both the Paris Eternal and Boston Uprising in early May. And that's where we started saying that Gladiators could potentially have a problem.
And I think it's really showing itself
I think it is now. I think what we predicted has come true. We are Nostradamus 1 and 2. Not that wasn't exactly a hard
And who knows?
But...
I mean, knowing NA, they could just come up during the Stormer Showdown and they could dominate, right?
And and then we'd look like idiots, but we'd never acknowledge it.
It just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense if that's the case based off of previous. It's like when everyone was done. Someone got really mad at me because I was like, yeah, I think Valiant should be Eternal. It's like, and it was like, but Eternal are really good. It's like, yeah, I've been a big fan of Eternal, but they hadn't looked that good recently. So there was no evidence to suggest other than Genji being buffed that Eternal would magically be really good. But it's like, but Valiant also has Genji players, and also they still play the same comp. They played the same comp. They still played Ash Tracer. Like, it's the same exact composition. It just felt like they didn't know how to deal with the Genji. So, like, the whole... so, really, just the variability is crazy sometimes, which is also why I feel that Asia is so much more competitive, because it's variable, but it's consistent, like, in terms of, like, their close matches that squads trade off, I feel.
Yeah.
Other than Seoul, which is like, you know, whatever.
And I think that makes Shock's position in the league right now and their performance so much more impressive, because the Asian League, you know, if you're, like... I would hope that the Dragons and the Chargers screaming each other. Like, iron sharpens iron. What was the Packing 10 quote? Like, iron sharpens iron, I think he said.
Yes.
But it's way easier to improve when there are people either at your level or better than them. Like, if you are constantly getting just destroyed in scrims, you know, it might suck. But if you can stay mentally strong, you learn way, way more from losses than from victories. And if the San Francisco Shock are just beating everybody, that could potentially cause them to stagnate. So right now, I definitely think that the San Francisco Shock are better than the Dragons. I'm like 90% confident after watching.
I think no matter what they are, they are a masterclass in how to build a roster.
Yeah, like whatever they're doing on the inside. Like,
even if they're
I want to know
their
team culture. I want to know like everything about the Shock to understand kind of how they are successful. But the last point I'm going to make on this topic is that I think that the Dragons have the potential to become the better team by the time we actually end up seeing a Shock and Dragon showdown, because they are in a more competitive region. They showed that they have a good structure. They're being consistent. And if them and the Charge put together, like 2 and 3 working together to kind of just improve, that's dangerous. Shock has got to at his struggle to try and improve in a more or less void where nobody in North America is at your level.
And we do need to be sort of wrapping up towards like
We
our
do.
mailbags and our final things. But I do want to respond to this one comment. I feel like this whole APAC region is better rhetoric. It goes all the way back to Fusion Union becoming trash tier when they moved to KR contenders. No, it's gone way. It's existed far longer than that. It existed for a significantly longer time. It existed before Fusion Union even went to contenders. Like, because, you know, we've had the fact that NA crushed Europe at the Atlantic Showdown. And that was mostly fueled by Korean talent that were on NA teams. It's fueled by the fact that consistently no Western rosters have ever performed well in the Overwatch League at a really good level. None have. There's been experiments. They've never have. They've never shown success. Now you could argue, well, that's unfair because maybe the coaching structures or the organizational things would be the problems, right? Would be more of a problem, an issue for those squads, right? And then, but we're having another repeat of the same experiment with Gladiators. DP has specifically stated, I want to have a very Western-centric roster. And so even though they do have some Korean
Problem with
players.
that means you end up with Western culture.
And I just don't think at any point, and then we would go back through the history of pre-Overwatch League and how Korea even significantly, unless we bring up like Apex Season 1, where Envy won, which was a big milestone,
It was a
but
big
was
deal.
never come close to being repeated ever again since then.
Yeah, and there is that thing where we're still talking about the one time we did it.
The one time, and that's
instead of the
it.
next time we will do it.
Like this is like Apex Season 1 Envy winning was like the esports moon landing.
Yeah.
Like this was like we've done it. We've a Western team has won in Korea. Like they have done it, and like that's how significant that was. Like people don't realize like how big of a deal, and it has also never been repeated or come close to being repeated since. So I don't think that this is like some sort of unfounded thing at all for us to be like, oh, it's crazy for us to even say this. It doesn't mean that Western players are bad. It just means that on average, the majority of the talent in the scene is better in Korea, and that's just fact. So it's just kind of fact until proven otherwise. It's kind of just fact.
So I would like to, we do have to wrap things up here, but first of all, I would like to give a shout out to the people who are watching us on Twitter. We saw some new people joining in. So for the people on Twitter, who don't know, we are also live on Twitch and YouTube. So welcome to the show. I hope you enjoyed it. We are a show that are live twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5 p.m. Central. So today obviously was the Tuesday show. We will be back this Thursday at 5 p.m. Central in order to discuss some more about the games as well as talk about the games that are coming up this weekend as well.
We're going to do our brackets, I think, for
we doing our
Thursday.
brackets on
I think,
Thursday?
yes. Last time, I remember when we were still at home, I forgot to do my bracket for the last thing, but this time I'll remember to use our bracket creator and we can discuss more of our thoughts going into Summer Showdown on Thursday, I think.
And last week, our mailbag question was wondering what kind of guests or who you wanted as guests on the podcast. We did see your submissions. The most requested ones were going to be Arrow, Jake, and
Pete Basilica.
So we will do our best, but we are also going to try and make sure that we get more guests, some exposure, and get you guys some more insight into the league. Not just our opinions, because apparently we're starting to agree way too much for our own good. We'll get some dissenting opinions and get some more things to be hotly contested.
We're merging into
But
one.
our discussion for our mailbag question for this week, and if you are new to the show and wondering what a mailbag is, every episode we ask chat a question because we want to know your thoughts. So the mailbag for this week is quite simply, who do you think is better, the Shock or the Dragons, and why? So we'll discuss your answers on Thursday. You can submit those answers either in the comment section on YouTube, in Avast's Discord. He has a section set up for that, as well as there's usually a Reddit thread posted by fans. So any one of those locations, we take a look at them to source your answers, and we discuss them on the next show, which is going to be again Thursday, 5 p.m. Central.
And that's obviously we're going to be focused a lot more heavily on sort of a preview, showing our brackets, I think, heading into Summer Showdown. But I think for us, we pretty much covered everything we could get to. We've had a lot of really good discussion. We brought up the bell. Bell's very important here.
Very important.
Very important. But overall, I think it's been pretty productive. So drop those comments for the mailbag in those aforementioned sections that Jayne just talked about. But that has been the Tuesday showing of Contested. I am Avast. That is Jayne. And thank you for watching. Right. I did.